think about a civilization so unimaginably powerful that it didn't just conquer half the known world, it literally absorbed the tactics and tech of its enemies to build an absolute juggernaut of an army. We're talking about a hyper-disciplined military machine engineered to crush any resistance, and an empire that laid down infrastructure that permanently rewired human history. Welcome to this explainer on the rise, might, and fall of the Roman Empire. So how exactly does a tiny, basically unremarkable village build the most unstoppable empire the ancient world had ever seen, and then just lose it all? That is the mystery we are unpacking today. We're skipping the basic myths. We're going straight into the strategic heart of Rome's military engineering to see exactly how they built such strong armies, how that dominance compounded over time, and what ultimately caused the whole system to rot and collapse. All right, Section 1, From Village to Republic. You know, the story of this massive superpower starts incredibly small. Legend has it that way back in 753 BC, Rome was just this unassuming little village sitting beside the Tiber River. It started out in a traditional kingdom era, but the real turning point, the thing that hardwired Rome for aggressive expansion, was the shift to a republic. Instead of one king calling the shots, power was shared among elected leaders with a strict system of checks and balances. And here's the kicker for their military. The top guys, the consuls, only had one single year in power to achieve military glory. Just 1 year. This created an intense, almost feverish ambition at the very top of the government. It fueled a relentless drive to expand, pushing Rome's borders further and further out with every single generation. Which brings us to Section 2, the unstoppable Roman army. Okay, let's really dive into this, because to understand how this republic conquered the world, we have to look at exactly how Rome built such unbelievably strong armies. It wasn't just about being highly trained, disciplined, and fearless, though they absolutely were. It was about relentless, practical innovation. At first, they fought in those rigid, inflexible Greek-style phalanxes, but they quickly adapted, developing the maniple system. Think of it like a checkerboard formation that gave them incredible tactical flexibility on broken terrain. But the real game changer? The Marian reforms around 107 BC. General Gaius Marius completely overhauled the system, turning a temporary militia of property owners into a massive, state-funded professional force. The state suddenly provided all the weapons, standardizing deadly gear like the pilum, a javelin specifically designed to bend on impact so the enemy couldn't throw it back at them. And their logistical discipline? Completely unmatched. Every single night on the march, rain or shine, dead tired or not, Roman legions would build a fully fortified camp with a trench and a palisade. That sheer operational grind created a military that didn't just win battles, it won massive wars of attrition against far larger forces. Moving on to Section 3, Conquest, Wealth, and Caesar. Now, because of that meticulously engineered military machine, the victories just kept compounding, and those victories directly funded explosive growth. As Rome conquered neighboring lands, they scooped up massive wealth and resources, expanding their footprint all across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. But here's the thing, military might alone can't hold an empire of that staggering size. You need a strategy. So Rome deployed a brilliant geopolitical tool, assimilation. They didn't just crush people and subjugate them. They selectively offered paths to Roman citizenship, especially to conquered elites. By turning former enemies into actual stakeholders with a voice in society, they effectively bought long-term loyalty. They cemented a massive, stable territory by basically getting the provinces to buy into the Roman system. And right at the absolute forefront of this massive expansion was Julius Caesar. Now, Caesar wasn't just a brilliant general. He recognized a fatal flaw in the late Republic. Remember those Marian reforms we just talked about? Well, they meant soldiers now relied on their commanding generals for their retirement land and pay, rather than the state itself. Caesar masterfully leveraged this during his brutally effective campaigns in the Gallic Wars. By sharing the spoils of war, he won the absolute fanatical loyalty of his veteran legions. The army essentially became more loyal to this one charismatic guy than to the actual Senate in Rome. It completely shifted the balance of power away from the politicians and straight into the hands of the military commanders. But, as you can probably guess, that kind of unprecedented individual power creates some seriously powerful enemies. And that brings us to a huge turning point in 44 BC. Terrified of Caesar's absolute dominance, a group of senators assassinated him right there on the Senate floor. The tragic irony here? They murdered Caesar to save the Republic, but the assassination was the exact spark that burned it down forever. His death was a massive shock to the system, instantly plunging the state into years of chaotic, bloody civil wars that permanently altered Rome's political DNA. Let's look at what happened next in Section 4, Pax Romana and Golden Age. So what's really fascinating here is that when the dust from those civil wars finally settled, the political landscape had completely transformed. The Republic was gone, replaced by a centralized empire. A guy named Octavian, who we later know as Augustus, pulled off one of history's most brilliant political maneuvers. He learned from Caesar's fatal mistake. Instead of flaunting his power, Augustus kept the visual facade of the old republic to keep the public and the remaining elites happy. There were still senators, still elections, but make no mistake, behind the scenes, Augustus systematically consolidated absolute military and political authority, becoming Rome's very first emperor. And under Augustus's singular rule, Rome kicked off a defining era known as the Pax Romana. Over 200 years of incredible peace and prosperity. But it is absolutely crucial to understand that this internal stability relied 100% on that unstoppable military machine we talked about earlier. By pushing those heavily armed legions to the distant, heavily fortified frontiers, Rome created this massive, secure bubble in the middle. Free from the constant threat of war at home, intercontinental trade skyrocketed, and the imperial economy just absolutely flourished. It's amazing what a society can accomplish when it has a 2-century golden age funded by conquest and protected by unbreachable borders. Rome poured its vast wealth into monumental infrastructure that literally still stands today. We're talking complex aqueducts for fresh water, grand public theaters, and of course, the legendary Colosseum. But honestly, their most impressive feat might just be their vast network of paved roads. While these routes were great for booming civilian trade, they were fundamentally a military masterstroke. Built straight and true, these incredibly durable highways were designed primarily to move those strong armies rapidly across the empire. It allowed Rome to project its force and crush any distant rebellions with terrifying speed. Which brings us to our final chapter, Section 5, The Fall and Lasting Legacy. Now, the somber reality of history is that no empire lasts forever, no matter how vast its territory or how disciplined its army is. So what exactly broke the unstoppable Roman machine? Well, it was a devastating equal parts combination of internal rot and external attacks. Internally, you had widespread corruption and severe economic crises gutting the state. To fund massive military costs, emperors kept debasing the silver currency, the denarius, which triggered crippling hyperinflation. And externally, the military made a fatal miscalculation. Facing constant pressure on the borders, Rome started heavily relying on integrating Germanic mercenaries, known as foederati, into their ranks. Eventually, the core of the Roman military was made up of foreign fighters, who didn't really have any deep cultural loyalty to Rome itself. This compounding series of internal and external disasters finally caught up to them, culminating in the year AD 476. But, it wasn't some explosive cinematic collapse. It was actually more of a final whimper. In 476, the last Western Roman emperor was quietly deposed by a Germanic king, and the central political structure of the West just officially dissolved. Although, I should mention, the eastern half of the empire, what we now call the Byzantine Empire, stayed stable enough to keep the Roman torch burning for almost another 1,000 years. But here is the really important takeaway. Even though the political borders of the Western Empire dissolved, its cultural and structural DNA completely survived the collapse. Rome's influence never truly disappeared. Our modern legal frameworks, deeply rooted in Roman law, the linguistic roots of the Romance languages spoken by hundreds of millions of people today, they evolved directly from Latin. Even the architectural blueprints of countless modern government buildings borrow heavily from classical Roman engineering and authority. So I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder. Which Roman ideas are still shaping your world today? The next time you look at a government building, read a legal document, or even just drive down a major highway, remember that fiercely disciplined empire that started as a tiny village on the Tiber River. The empire might have fallen over a millennia ago, but its legacy is still hiding in plain sight, all around us. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the history that built our world.